In August 1995, a woman in a small Puerto Rican town looked out her window and saw something that shouldn't exist. It was standing on two legs. It had giant glowing red eyes and a row of sharp spikes running all the way down its spine. Within months, this thing had triggered an absolute global panic. People called it the Chupacabra, the goat sucker. Today, almost everyone just writes it off as a cheesy 90s urban legend or a sick coyote with a bad case of mange. But the actual origin of this thing is insane. The real story involves secret US military bases, an H.R. Giger sci-fi movie, the actual history of chemical weapons testing on civilian populations, and a microscopic parasite. Because it turns out, a few dead goats in the jungle were basically the least crazy part of this whole story. Everyone thinks this story starts in 1995. It doesn't. It actually starts 20 years earlier, in a quiet farming valley in northwestern Puerto Rico. Back in February 1975, in this tiny rural neighborhood called Barrio Rocha, local farmers walked out to their pastures one morning and found a slaughterhouse. Only without the mess. In a single night, something had killed 15 cows, 3 goats, 2 geese, and a pig. Just left them lying dead in the grass. But when the farmers actually walked up to the bodies, nothing made sense. There were no slash marks or torn limbs, and definitely no signs of teeth ripping flesh. Instead, every single animal had these clean, circular puncture wounds punched directly into the side of the neck, right near the windpipe. It looked like someone had taken a hollow metal pipe and driven it straight into their carotid arteries. The police show up, but they are completely clueless. There are no footprints in the mud around the pasture, no broken fences, no tire tracks. Whatever killed these animals just dropped into the middle of the field, did its work, and vanished. Now, the cops try to play it down. They tell everyone to stay calm and suggest it was probably just a pack of stray dogs. But the locals weren't buying that for a second. Farmers know what a dog attack looks like. Feral dogs rip animals to pieces. They don't leave surgical drill hole punctures in a cow's neck. By the end of that first week, the regional police station is just getting flooded with reports of more strange deaths. And the whole valley goes on lockdown. You've got farmers sleeping out in their barns with shotguns, neighbors bolting their doors before sunset, and the streets of this little town are just completely dead after dark, because everyone is just waiting to see what comes out of the hills next. By late March, the government finally realizes they've got a full-blown crisis on their hands. The Department of Agriculture sends down a team of agronomists and a couple of state vets, including this guy named Dr. Juan Varela, to actually inspect the carcasses and figure out what's going on. Dr. Juan Varela runs a bunch of necropsies, and his final report is about as ordinary as it gets. But by this point, nobody in Moca wants to hear ordinary. He cuts open the animals, and it turns out some of them had actually just been shot. Varela is literally pulling lead buckshot out of the animal tissue. Panicked locals had been running around at night, shooting at shadows in the brush. And as for the rest of the livestock, Varela just writes the wounds off as classic feral dog attacks. The municipal police write it down in their logs plain as day. It's just packs of wild dogs and trigger-happy farmers shooting in the dark. But absolutely nobody buys it. The cops had already spent weeks pushing the dog theory, so they had zero credibility left. The locals look at these perfectly round holes in their livestock's necks and think, well, feral dogs don't bite a goose and just leave it lying there without eating a single piece of meat. And dogs definitely don't clean up their own paw prints in the mud. Like I said before, these are farmers. They know a dog attack is messy and chaotic and loud. So when the government looks at a completely intact cow with 2 surgical holes in its throat and tells you, hey, it's just dogs, you don't feel reassured. You feel like they're trying to cover something up. So the official report goes straight in the trash. And that is exactly when the name, El Vampiro de Moca, really starts getting whispered around town. Everyone is already completely paranoid, and the whole place is just waiting for a spark. And this is where the local tabloids get involved. Because right in the middle of this brutal economic slump in the mid-70s, the newspaper business in Puerto Rico was completely cutthroat. Papers were doing whatever it took to keep people buying at the newsstands. There was this one tabloid daily called El Vocero, and they had a regional reporter out there named Augusto Vale. Everyone just called him Tute. Tute sees these dead sheep in Barrio Rocha and instantly knows he's sitting on a gold mine. So literally on day one of the outbreak, February 25th, 1975, El Vocero runs this front page story. The main headline is pretty standard. En misterio, muertes de varios animales. Mystery, deaths of various animals. But right underneath it, they print this tiny, ominous subheader. Víctimas de un vampiro. They didn't have a single shred of proof, but just putting that question on the front page got everyone talking. And once the editors saw how fast that issue sold out, they decided to just run with it. By March 10th, they dropped the question marks entirely and go with a massive headline. Policía busca al vampiro de Moca. Just think about how wild that is. The actual police are out there looking for stray dogs and trigger-happy farmers, but the paper is telling the entire island that the cops are officially hunting a vampire. For the next few months, it's just a constant barrage. Every time a farmer loses a chicken, Tute is right there. Víctimas del vampiro llegan a 34, and vampiro vuelve a atacar. When they finally ran out of actual dead animals to report on, they just started making stuff up. They run articles suggesting local cultists are draining animal blood for satanic ceremonies in the hills. When people get bored of that, they bring in ufologists who claim the Moca vampire is actually an alien pet left behind by a UFO flying over El Yunque. They took this sad, ordinary problem of wild dogs and turned it into a massive sci-fi horror movie. By the time the killings actually stopped in July, El Vocero had fully cemented the legend. On July 31st, they ran this big retrospective piece. Vampiro de Moca ataca de nuevo. The Moca vampire eventually faded away. The news cycle moved on, and people went back to their lives. But the media had learned the trick. The blueprint was already drawn. They realized that if you take dead farm animals, throw in some clean neck punctures, and print the word vampire on the front page, you can sell out every newsstand on the island. So 20 years later, when the animals start dying again in Canovanas, everyone already knew exactly how to play the game. They didn't have to invent a new playbook. They just needed a new name. So, flash forward to March 1995. The playbook gets busted wide open again. Down in the mountain town of Orocovis, 8 sheep turn up dead with clean puncture wounds to the neck, identical to the ones in Moca. But things don't really explode until August, over on the northeast coast, in a town called Canovanas, because that is where the creature goes from being a weird rumor to a physical, visible monster. And it's all thanks to a woman named Madeline Tolentino. One afternoon, Tolentino looks out her window and sees this absolutely bizarre creature outside her house. She describes it as being about 3 or 4 feet tall, hopping around like a kangaroo on these long, thin legs with sharp claws. It had this mottled grey-brown skin that looked almost burnt, and a ridge of sharp spikes running all the way down its back. But the details that really messed with people were the face, these massive glowing red eyes and huge fangs, and the fact that it completely lacked any external genitals or an anus, while leaving behind this heavy, suffocating smell of sulfur. Her description instantly hits the papers, and boom, it becomes the absolute blueprint. For the next decade, if you asked anyone from San Juan to Mexico City to draw the Chupacabra, they drew exactly what Madeline saw. But here is the wildest part of this whole thing. In 2010, this investigator named Benjamin Radford actually goes down to Puerto Rico to look into her story. And he notices something weird about the timeline. Just 1 month before Tolentino's sighting, in July 1995, the sci-fi horror movie Species had opened in Puerto Rican theaters. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what the monster looks like. It's this human-alien hybrid's named Syl, designed by H.R. Giger, the same guy who designed the alien xenomorph. Syl has a translucent, silver-grey hide, massive alien eyes, a row of sharp spikes running down her spine, and a completely featureless groin with 0 reproductive organs. It is an absolute dead ringer for the creature Tolentino claimed she saw in her yard. Radford actually sat down with Tolentino and asked her about the film, and she didn't even try to hide it. She confirmed she had just watched the movie in the theater a few weeks before her sighting, and she literally told him it looked like the Chupacabra, with spines on its back and all. The resemblance was really impressive. Tolentino wasn't lying. She didn't make it up for attention. She probably did see a stray dog or a monkey or just a weird shadow in the trees. But because Giger's movie was so fresh in her head, her brain just filled in the blanks. She pasted a Hollywood alien over whatever she actually saw in the bushes. And then the media took that image, printed it on the front page, and ran with it. And within weeks, a literal movie monster became a real-world panic. So, right now, the media is losing its mind over Tolentino's alien description. The whole island is in a frenzy, but the thing still doesn't actually have a name. Everyone's just calling it the Predator or the Canavanus creature. Enter Silverio Perez. He's this massive San Juan radio host, musician, and comedian, part of this legendary political satire group called Los Rayos Gamma. One morning in late 1995, he's on his radio show talking about this rural panic, and he's just making fun of how ridiculous the whole thing is. And right in the middle of the broadcast, he casually throws out this joke name he put together, El Chupacabras. He literally just mashed up the Spanish word chupa, which means to suck, and cabras, meaning goats, goat sucker. He meant it as a total joke, a cartoon name to mock these farmers who were claiming a monster was drinking their livestock's blood. And by the way, because of how Spanish grammar works, combining a verb and a plural noun makes it El Chupacabras, with an S at the end, even if you're only talking about one monster. But when the name eventually crossed over into English media, everyone just dropped the S, and it became the Chupacabra. The name was just so catchy, it didn't even need translating. It sounded exotic, it sounded dangerous, and it instantly hooked the entire global cryptozoology crowd. But the joke completely backfired, or rather, it worked too well. Local TV networks and regional news wires totally missed the sarcasm. They picked up the name and just started using it completely straight in their serious news broadcasts. Within days, El Chupacabras went from a comedian's throwaway punchline to this official, scientific-sounding label for the beast. And that is when the tabloids smell blood in the water. Our old friends at El Vocero, the exact same paper that hyped up the Moca vampire 20 years earlier, realize they've got a massive sequel on his hands, and they are not missing out on the sales boom. So they start running front-page sketches of the monster, based exactly on Madeline Tolentino's description. They print these terrifying, full-blown illustrations of a grey-skinned, red-eyed alien covered in spikes, looking like it's about to jump right off the page. If you walked past any newsstand in Puerto Rico that fall, those glowing red eyes were just staring right back at you. The TV networks see the print sales exploding, so WAPA and Telemundo start running daily segments. They've got reporters out in the banana fields of Canavanus, shoving microphones in front of farmers who swear they just saw a shadow hop by, or heard some weird screeching in the night. The coverage jumps the Caribbean, hits Miami, hits Mexico, and just sweeps across Latin America. It became this massive feedback loop. The more the news reported the name, the more people saw those sketches. And the more people saw the sketches, the more they started looking out their own windows at night, absolutely terrified that H.R. Giger's alien was hiding in their yard. A comedian's radio joke had accidentally created a global brand. And once the Chupacabra becomes this massive global brand, local politicians realize they can use it. Specifically, the mayor of Canavanus, a guy named Jose Chimo Soto. This guy is an absolute character. He sees this massive media circus. He sees WAPA and Telemundo broadcasting from his town every single night, and he decides to turn the monster hunt into a weekly parade. Every week, Chimo gets this huge search party together. We are talking municipal cops, civil defense officers, local volunteers, plus an entire caravan of reporters following his every move. And Chimo is right at the front of it, carrying a rifle and strapping a massive machete to his belt, like he's Indiana Jones going into the jungle. They're driving out in the middle of the night in these big pickup trucks, shining spotlights into the brush. And they aren't just looking around. They actually build these heavy iron cage traps. And the bait? Live baby goats. They literally chain these poor little cabritos inside the cages, just hoping the crying will lure the alien out of the trees. Every time a farmer reports a dead chicken, Chimo's team rushes the scene like a SWAT team. He inspects the carcasses, looks totally serious for the cameras, and then announces the coordinates for the next midnight hunt. You had civil defense guys setting up command posts in the middle of the forest, shining searchlights into the canopy of El Yunque. It got so wild that local kids started selling homemade Chupacabra t-shirts to the tourists who were showing up just to watch the mayor's expeditions. Because it was a total circus. Hundreds of locals would follow the caravans on foot or in their cars, drinking beer, blasting music, and treating the whole thing like a giant block party. Under the hood, this was all just a calculated political stunt. Chimo Soto wasn't stupid. He knew he wasn't going to catch a space alien in a cage with a baby goat. But he also knew that every time he stood in front of a camera with his rifle, he looked like a proactive, fearless leader, personally defending his town. While the suits in the central government up in San Juan were completely ignoring the farmers, Chimo is out there in the mud at 3 a.m., looking like the only guy who actually cared. It worked perfectly. It turned him into a local folk hero. He kept these weekly hunts going for months, and even though they never caught anything except a few stray dogs and some incredibly confused mongooses, it didn't matter. The Chupacabra panic made Chimo Soto politically untouchable, because it proved that in a crisis, you don't actually need to solve the problem. You just need to put on a really good show. But while Chimo is out there playing Indiana Jones, everyone else is starting to ask a much darker question. If this thing is actually real, where did it come from? And in Puerto Rico, if you have a weird, unexplained biological mystery, your eyes immediately go to the US military. Because for decades, the military had this massive, incredibly secretive footprint on the island. The center of it all was the Roosevelt Roads Naval Station, this giant base over on the East Coast that basically operated like its own sovereign country. And right next to it, you had the island of Vieques, which the US Navy used as a live-fire bombing range for over 60 years. People literally lived with the constant sound of bombs rattling their windows, and the whole area was just wrapped in incredibly tight military security. This base was massive. It had its own airfields, its own ports, and thousands of personnel living behind these high barbed wire fences. If you were a local, you weren't allowed anywhere near it. You just saw military helicopters flying in and out of the rainforest, and Navy warships anchored off the coast. It just felt like this silent, unaccountable empire operating right in your backyard. So when a weird, reptilian beast starts draining livestock in Canovanas, which is sitting literally right on the edge of the El Yunque rainforest, the local rumor mill just goes into overdrive. People start talking about secret genetic labs. The rumor was that the US government had built these hidden, underground research complexes deep inside the rainforest. And the theory was that military scientists were down there splicing animal DNA, trying to create some kind of stealth biological weapon. And for the locals, it all just added up. You've got a massive military base down the road, a bombing range next door, and a dense, unexplored rainforest where the government can hide whatever it wants. So the story shifts. The Chupacabra isn't a space alien or a demon anymore. It's an escaped genetic experiment. It's a chimera, a lab-grown weapon that broke out of its cage in El Yunque and made its way down the mountain into the farms. This wasn't just some crazy tinfoil hat paranoia. In 1995, the relationship between Puerto Ricans and the US military was at rock bottom. The Navy was bombing Vieques, the government refused to say exactly what they were testing, and there was this deep, historical feeling of the island just being used as a giant laboratory. So when the military comes out and says, "Hey, we don't have any genetic monsters," nobody believes them. The secrecy itself became the proof. To the farmers, the US military was already doing terrible things to their land, so why wouldn't they be hiding a monster in the rainforest? Because when you actually look at what the military was doing out on Vieques, those conspiracy theories just sound like simple logic. This wasn't just a normal bombing range. For decades, the US military used Vieques to test some of the most toxic, experimental weapons in their entire arsenal. They were dropping napalm all over the hills. They sprayed Agent Orange just to clear the vegetation. They even tested depleted uranium shells, which left radioactive dust scattered all across the bombing zones. On top of that, you had massive amounts of heavy metals, specifically lead and mercury, soaking straight into the soil and leaching into the groundwater every single time a shell exploded. It was an absolute chemical cocktail. The island was a toxic waste dump operating in broad daylight. So if you're a local farmer watching your animals die, you don't even need to believe in hidden underground alien labs to get paranoid. You just look at the runoff. This whole new theory starts circulating. People start saying the Chupacabra isn't a sci-fi monster or some genetic experiment grown in a test tube. It's a mutant. The idea was that all this military runoff, the lead, the mercury, the depleted uranium, had contaminated the local wildlife. The rumor was that a pack of wild dogs, or maybe some coyotes that had made their way onto the island, had drank the contaminated water or eaten poisoned prey. The chemicals mutated them, made them lose their fur, grow weirdly misshapen, and turn into these hairless, aggressive beasts that had to hunt livestock just to survive. And the craziest part is, the military actually admitted to dropping this stuff. After years of denying it, the Pentagon finally had to confess that yeah, they'd fired depleted uranium bullets on Vieques. They had stored massive piles of toxic explosives right near residential areas. The contamination was so bad that cancer rates on Vieques were way higher than the rest of Puerto Rico. The Navy eventually shuts the bombing range down in 2003 after massive protests, but they leave behind thousands of unexploded bombs and a landscape completely poisoned by heavy metals. And when the military tried to clean it up, they just blew up the old bombs in the open air, sending even more toxic smoke right over the towns. So to the average person living there, the government wasn't just secretive, they were actively hostile to the environment. The Chupacabra wasn't just folklore anymore. It became the literal, physical result of the military's toxic neglect. If they could poison the water supply, they could create the beast that drank the blood. So when these locals are looking at dead, bloodless goats, they aren't thinking about alien movies anymore. They are looking at the literal poison that had been dumped on their homes. If the military's bombs could mutate the land and give people cancer, it really wasn't a stretch to believe they'd mutated a wild dog into a monster. But this paranoia wasn't just about pollution. It went way deeper than that, straight into actual human experimentation. Back in the 1950s, these two American researchers named Gregory Pincus and John Rock were trying to develop the world's first oral contraceptive, the birth control pill, which they called Enovid. But they had a massive problem. They couldn't run large-scale human trials in the US because birth control was literally illegal in most states. So they looked south and decided to just use Puerto Rico as their giant test lab. They targeted the poorest, most vulnerable people they could find. They went straight into the brand new public housing projects in San Juan and Rio Piedras, places like Llorens Torres. And the way they ran these trials was incredibly shady. They skipped the whole informed consent part. They didn't tell these women the pill was experimental. And they definitely didn't explain the risks. They just told them it was a medicine that would prevent pregnancy. And back then, the dosage of hormones in Enovid was massive, like 10 times higher than what you'd find in a normal birth control pill today. So the side effects hit these women like a freight train. They were getting severe nausea, agonizing headaches, dizziness, life-threatening blood clots. But when the women actually complained about it, Pincus and Rock just dismissed them. They called the symptoms psychosomatic, meaning they told these women they were just making it up in their heads. But it gets so much worse, because during the trials, 3 of the female test subjects actually died, and the researchers didn't even perform autopsies. They just buried the bodies, swept the deaths under the rug, and claimed they had nothing to do with the experimental drug. Pincus and Rock got their FDA approval. The pill became a global commercial goldmine, and the women of Llorens Torres were just left with the scars. People in those housing projects passed these stories down like family tragedies. It became this understood cultural warning. Do not trust the American doctors, and definitely don't trust the government officials who show up telling you they're here to help. So when the Chupacabra shows up 40 years later, and the US military and local cops start telling everyone, relax, it's just dogs, it triggers that exact same historical reflex. To a lot of Puerto Ricans, the idea of the US government using the island as a giant, secretive lab for genetic experiments wasn't some crazy conspiracy theory. It was literally just history repeating itself. They had already seen their mothers and grandmothers used as guinea pigs, right in their own living rooms. If the government was willing to use poor women in housing projects to test experimental drugs, it really wasn't a leap to believe they were using El Yunque to test biological weapons. The trust was already dead. But eventually, the legend hops the Gulf of Mexico and lands in the US Southwest. And when it gets there, the monster goes through this absolutely bizarre physical transformation. In Puerto Rico, everyone was hunting H.R. Geiger's bipedal alien with the red eyes and the back spikes. But in places like Texas and New Mexico, people start reporting something completely different. They describe this animal running on 4 legs. They say it looks like a dog or a coyote, but it's completely hairless, with this weird, leathery, blue-grey skin, a severe overbite, and long clawed toes. The alien space hopper is just gone, replaced by this creepy, hairless phantom dog. And the absolute epicenter of this new Texas version is a little town called Cuero, about 90 miles east of San Antonio. It starts in 2007 with this local rancher named Phyllis Canyon. Canyon starts losing her chickens. Over a few months, she finds dozens of her birds dead, but they aren't torn apart or eaten. She says they're just lying there, completely intact, but with these tiny punctures in their necks, totally drained of blood. Then, one morning, Canyon is driving down the road near her ranch, and she sees a dead animal lying in the dirt. She pulls over, looks at it, and has absolutely no idea what she's looking at. It's about the size of a medium dog, but it has 0 fur. Its skin is this smooth, leathery, blue-grey color. It has these long, skinny legs, this weirdly elongated snout, and a massive overbite with fangs sticking out. Canyon looks at this thing and immediately thinks, this is it. This is the Chupacabra. And she doesn't just call the papers, she actually bags the animal up, takes it home, cuts the head off, and stores it in her freezer. She keeps the rest of the carcass so researchers can actually test the tissue, and the media absolutely loses it. Within days, news crews are swarming Cuero, and Canyon is literally showing off this blue, hairless head on national television. People are looking at the pictures thinking they finally have physical proof of the monster. The myth had just shapeshifted to fit the Texas landscape. Ranchers all across the Southwest start reporting the exact same thing. From Texas to Arizona, farmers are looking out at their pastures and seeing these weird blue-grey shapes draft through the brush at dusk. They find dead livestock, and because the Puerto Rican name was already this massive global brand, they immediately just label these animals as chupacabras. The media takes the name, pastes it onto this new dog-like creature, and completely erases the original alien. The internet blows up with amateur videos of these hairless animals running down dirt roads, and for a whole new generation of Americans, this blue-grey dog was the only Chupacabra. The bipedal alien of Canovanas was dead, and in its place was this new, leathery, blue-skinned beast of the American Southwest. So while the internet is losing its mind over these blue monsters, scientists are quietly running tests on the carcasses, and the answer they get back is just completely mundane. Phyllis Canyon and a few other ranchers actually mailed tissue samples off to genetics labs at UC Davis and Texas State. The labs run the DNA, and the results are completely unanimous. These things aren't aliens, they aren't military mutants, they are literally just coyotes. Maybe a few feral dogs or wolf-coyote hybrids mixed in, but at the end of the day, dogs. But obviously, that leaves a massive question. If they're just coyotes, why do they look like hairless, blue-skinned demons? The answer is this tiny, microscopic parasite called Sarcoptes scabiei. You probably just know it as severe mange, which is a brutal skin disease caused by these tiny mites that burrow under the animal's skin. In wild canines like coyotes and foxes, a severe infestation causes all their hair to fall out. But it doesn't just make them bald. The constant scratching and the body's immune reaction causes their skin to turn thick, leathery, and dark. And because the infection constricts the blood vessels near the surface of the skin, it cuts off the normal blood flow, leaving the hide with this weird, eerie blue-grey color. It literally turns a normal coyote into a living mummy. When the vets inspected Canyon's frozen head, they found millions of these mites still crawling in the tissue. The thick skin and the blue pigment was just the textbook reaction of a canine body trying to defend itself against the bugs. There was zero alien DNA. It was just a classic, well-understood veterinary case. But because it happened right as viral internet videos were taking off, the actual science just got completely drowned out by the hype. And the wildest part is, the mange doesn't just change how they look, it completely changes how they hunt. A coyote with severe mange is incredibly weak. They're exhausted, their immune systems are failing, and they are literally starving to death. They just don't have the energy to chase down fast, wild prey like a rabbit or a deer anymore. So they have to find something easy. They wander onto these ranches looking for livestock that are fenced in and can't run away. They slip in at night, kill a few birds because they're sitting ducks, and then they either wander off or drop dead on the road nearby. It's just this tragic biological coincidence. You take a normal wild predator, strip its fur, turn its skin blue, and make it so weak it can only hunt fenced-in farm animals. To a rancher who has never seen severe mange before, that looks exactly like a legendary monster. Under the microscope, it's really just a sad, sick coyote that got eaten alive by mites. Even if we accept that these blue monsters are just sick coyotes, there is still one massive mystery. What about the blood? How do you explain these carcasses being completely drained, with zero mess on the ground? To a rancher, it looks like a clean surgical extraction. But if you talk to a forensic pathologist, they'll tell you the whole bloodless carcass thing is basically just an optical illusion. Because think about how blood actually leaves a body. It needs pressure. To pump blood out of a wound, the heart has to be actively beating. The second that heart stops, the pressure drops to zero. So if a coyote bites a goat's neck and kills it, only a tiny amount of blood actually leaks out before the heart stops pumping. The rest of the blood doesn't just evaporate, it stays inside the body. But because of gravity, it doesn't stay evenly distributed. It all just sinks to the lowest point, whatever part is touching the ground. Pathologists call it livor mortis. So if a goat is lying on its side, all the blood sinks down to the bottom half. If you cut into the top of that carcass a few hours later, the meat looks completely white, dry, and drained. But if you flip the animal over and cut into the bottom, all the blood is pooled right there under the skin. It was never sucked out. It just went downstairs. And as for the bite marks, coyotes don't have straws for teeth. They hunt by grabbing the neck to crush the windpipe. Their fangs puncture the arteries, which causes massive internal bleeding inside the neck cavity. But the reason there isn't a puddle of blood in the dirt is just the local cleanup crew. The second an animal dies, blowflies and insects arrive within minutes. They swarm the wet blood leaking from those punctures. They feed on it, and they clean the edges of the bite marks so fast that by the time a farmer finds it the next morning, the wounds look completely dry and perfectly circular. The flies just licked the plate clean. So if you're a rancher walking out at 6 a.m., seeing a dead goat with 2 dry holes in its neck and 0 blood in the grass, it is incredibly jarring. Your brain immediately jumps to a monster, but the grass is only clean because the blood pressure dropped the millisecond the throat was crushed, and the flies did the rest of the work in the dark. If you don't know about post-mortem pooling, you just assume the blood was sucked out. That entire vampire myth is built on an optical illusion. It takes a completely normal canine kill and turns it into a horror movie, just because we don't see what happens inside a body after the heart stops. When vets actually cut these animals open, the blood is still right there. The vampirism isn't a supernatural curse. It's literally just gravity, vascular collapse, and a few hungry flies doing exactly what nature designed them to do. But obviously, the actual science never really catches up to the internet. Because the Chupacabra wasn't just some local campfire story that slowly spread by word of mouth. It was actually the first ever web-native cryptid. And you have to think about the timing. The mid to late 90s is exactly when the internet is first exploding into normal houses. Before the web, if a weird story happened in rural Puerto Rico, it stayed in Puerto Rico. Maybe it hits a local tabloid, but it isn't crossing oceans unless some major TV network decides to broadcast it. But the internet just blew that wide open. Suddenly, you've got these early Usenet groups, message boards, and email chains that can blast information across the globe in seconds. And remember, this is the dial-up era. Digital photos were these tiny, heavily compressed, incredibly pixelated files. If you attach a blurry, blocky photo of a sick, hairless coyote to an email, that compression makes it look like a monster. The bad resolution actually helped the myth. People are downloading these blurry JPEGs, forwarding them to their friends, and just stacking their own wild theories on top. It completely bypassed every editor and fact-checker on Earth. So a farmer in Mexico or Texas reads an email chain about a red-eyed beast. He goes outside, sees a sick coyote in the brush, and his brain immediately fills in the blanks with what he just read online. He snaps a blurry photo, posts it on a forum, and the myth just spirals. By the time the actual DNA results and pathology reports came out years later, the internet had already beamed this monster onto millions of computer screens. You had those early paranormal websites, the ones with the flashing background GIFs and the creepy MIDI music, dedicating entire pages to tracking this thing. Guys on alt.paranormal are arguing over whether it's an alien or a mutant, sharing raw text files of eyewitness reports from random villages. The internet meant a teenager in Ohio was reading the exact same unverified rumor as a reporter in San Juan. Before this, legends literally took decades or centuries to evolve and spread, but the web compressed that entire timeline into weeks. The monster didn't need to physically walk across any borders. It just rode a dial-up connection straight into our living rooms. But while the internet is doing its thing, back down on the ground, this myth is actually serving a very practical, slightly shady purpose. It became the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for rural crime. Because if a sheep or a goat goes missing, blaming a supernatural beast is just way easier than dealing with the awkward, dangerous reality. Think about neighbor-on-neighbor livestock theft. In these small, tight-knit farming communities, accusing the guy next door of stealing your goats is a massive deal. It starts generational family feuds, causes violence, ruins relationships. But if you just blame the Chupacabra, problem solved. Nobody gets shot, nobody has to call the cops, and the community stays peaceful, or take illegal dog fighting. This is a huge issue in rural areas, both in Puerto Rico and the US Southwest. If you're running a fighting ring out in the country, sometimes those dogs break loose and tear up local livestock, or they come home covered in horrific gashes. If a farmer walks out and finds his prized goat killed by his neighbor's fighting dog, he can't go to the police without blowing up this entire underground gambling ring. So everyone just agrees to blame the monster. The dog owner keeps his secret, the farmer writes off the loss, and the cops get to close the file. And honestly, local cops loved the Chupacabra. Investigating unsolved livestock deaths is a massive headache, and it takes up time and resources that small rural departments just don't have. Filing a report that says coyote attack or theft means paperwork, evidence, and suspect interviews. Writing down Chupacabra, you just chalk it up to local superstition, close the case, and go to lunch. So honestly, when you strip away the tabloids and the DNA labs and the safari hats, just picture this. A farmer is parked on a dirt road in the Texas brush at 3 in the morning. His headlights are cutting through the dust. And standing right there in the light is the thing he's been hunting for weeks. It's not a demon. It's not an escaped lab weapon. It's a coyote. Hairless, blue-gray skin, ribs showing through, too sick and too slow to even run away from the light. 40 years of tabloid front pages, midnight goat traps, and DNA sequences, and this is what's actually standing in the road. That's it. That's the whole thing. But knowing that doesn't kill the story. People in Cuero still sell the t-shirts. Parents in Moca still tell their kids about the vampire that came through in '75. Somewhere tonight, a rancher is going to walk out to a dead goat and think Chupacabra, way before he thinks coyote. And no lab report is ever going to beat him to that thought, because a DNA test gives you a fact. But a story you can tell your kids about a monster that hunts the thing you're trying to protect. That does something a fact just can't do. That's not the science losing. That's just two different jobs. So take your pick. It's a sick, unlucky animal that got ugly at the worst possible time. Or it's still out there. I looked at the DNA. I know which one I believe. I just don't think that settles it for anybody but me.